Every breeder at the auction took one look at the starving pregnant mare with the lame leg and decided she wasn't worth saving. Emma had no idea that her desperate $300 bid would be worth a fortune by the following spring. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The autumn wind swept through the dusty auction grounds of Topeka, Kansas, carrying with it the mingled scents of hay, leather, and the nervous sweat of hundreds of horses. It was the largest draft horse sale in the Midwest, a 4-day event that drew breeders, farmers, and wealthy collectors from across the country. Men in expensive suits mingled with weathered ranchers in worn boots, all of them searching for the same thing: value, potential, profit. The auction house buzzed with anticipation as lot after lot of magnificent Belgians and Percherons paraded through the ring, their massive hooves thundering against the packed earth like drums announcing royalty. Prices soared into the tens of thousands, and satisfied buyers led their new acquisitions away with pride gleaming in their eyes. But there was one horse that day who would not share in the glory. She stood alone in the far corner of the holding pens, her massive chestnut body casting a shadow that seemed to swallow the light around her. Her name, according to the weathered tag on her halter, was simply number 847. She was enormous, even by draft horse standards. Standing over 18 hands tall and weighing close to 2,200 pounds, she towered over the other horses like a gentle mountain rising from the plains. Her coat was the color of burnished copper, and her mane and tail flowed like rivers of cream, catching the afternoon light and turning it to gold. Under different circumstances, she might have been the star of the sale. But there was something that made every potential buyer pause, shake their head, and walk away. Her belly hung low and heavy, swollen with the unmistakable curve of advanced pregnancy. Worse still, no one knew who the sire was. She had been found wandering a foreclosed property in rural Ohio, abandoned by owners who had left in the night without a word to anyone. The mare had survived on her own for nearly 3 weeks before animal control finally brought her in. She was malnourished, her ribs showing beneath her dull coat, and the veterinarian who examined her could only guess that she was perhaps 8 or 9 years old. Her teeth showed signs of neglect, her hooves were cracked and overgrown, and she walked with a slight limp in her left rear leg that suggested an old injury that had never properly healed. The auctioneer's voice crackled through the speakers as the morning lots concluded. Number 847 would be among the last to sell, relegated to the afternoon session where the less desirable animals were cleared out at whatever price the market would bear. The serious buyers had already made their purchases and departed. What remained were the bargain hunters, the desperate, and the occasional curious soul who wandered in off the street. Among them was a young woman named Emma Collins, who had driven nearly 6 hours from her small farm in southern Missouri with nothing but $300 in her pocket, in a dream that most people told her was foolish. Emma was 26 years old, with calloused hands that told the story of a life spent working with animals. She had inherited her grandmother's 40-acre property 2 years earlier, a modest spread with a weathered barn and pastures that had seen better days. She had come to the auction hoping to find an affordable draft horse that could help her with the heavy farm work, something that would cost less than the broken-down tractor she could not afford to repair. When Emma first saw number 847, she stopped walking. Something in the mare's eyes caught her attention, a depth of intelligence and sadness that seemed almost human. The horse stood perfectly still, watching the parade of people who passed by without a second glance. Her ears, which had been flat against her head when others approached, perked forward slightly as Emma drew near. The young woman extended her hand slowly, palm up, the way her grandmother had taught her when she was just a girl. The mare hesitated, then stretched her massive neck forward and breathed warm air across Emma's fingers. In that moment, something passed between them, an understanding that neither could explain but both could feel. Emma noticed the way the other buyers avoided the pen entirely. She overheard conversations that made her heart ache. That one's damaged goods, probably carrying some grade foal that won't be worth the cost of feeding it. And look at her leg. She'll be nothing but vet bills. The mare seemed to understand the words, or perhaps just the tone, because she lowered her head and turned away, retreating to the far corner of her pen, as if accepting the rejection as her fate. Emma stayed by the fence, watching. She saw the way the mare's tail swished nervously whenever someone walked too close. She noticed how the horse's breathing quickened when the handlers moved nearby, a sign of anxiety born from whatever hardships she had endured before arriving here. But she also saw something else. Despite everything, despite the neglect and the abandonment and the long weeks of survival, there was a fire in this horse that had not been extinguished. It burned quietly in those dark eyes, waiting for someone to recognize it. When the afternoon session finally began, Emma found a seat near the front of the auction ring. She watched as horse after horse sold for prices that made her stomach turn. Even the least impressive animals were fetching $800, $1,000, $1,200. Her $300 felt like pocket change in a world that traded in fortunes. The lots counted down, and her hope dimmed with each passing sale. Then the handler led number 847 into the ring. The mare entered slowly, her pregnant belly swaying with each careful step. The auctioneer began his rapid-fire chant, starting the bidding at $500. The crowd was silent. He dropped to $400, still nothing. $300 brought a murmur of interest, but no raised paddles. When he reached $200, a man in the back raised his hand. Emma recognized the type immediately. He was a kill buyer, one of the men who purchased unwanted horses for pennies on the pound and shipped them across the border to slaughter. The mare would bring a few $100s for her meat, and her unborn foal would never take its first breath. The auctioneer called for $250. The kill buyer nodded again. Emma's hand shot into the air before she could think. $300, she called out, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. The kill buyer turned to look at her, his expression a mixture of amusement and annoyance. He raised his paddle. $350. Emma felt her stomach drop. She did not have $350. She had exactly $312, counting the loose change in her truck's console. But then she looked at the mare standing in the ring, and she saw those eyes looking back at her with something that might have been hope. The auction ring fell into a tense silence as the auctioneer's eyes moved between Emma and the kill buyer. $350 going once, he called, his voice echoing off the metal rafters. Emma's mind raced through possibilities. She thought of her grandmother's wedding ring, still tucked away in a velvet box at home. She thought of the emergency fund she had been building for winter feed, the money she absolutely could not spare. And then she thought of those eyes, the ones watching her now from the center of the ring, and she made a decision that would change everything. $375, Emma called out, her voice breaking slightly on the words. She had no idea how she would pay for this. The kill buyer shifted in his seat and studied her for a long moment. She was young, clearly not wealthy, and obviously emotional about the horse. He had seen her type before, bleeding hearts who rescued animals they could not afford and ended up right back at auction within the year. He could wait. There would always be another horse, another opportunity. With a dismissive wave of his hand, he settled back in his chair and let the bid stand. Sold, the auctioneer announced, bringing down his gavel with a crack that seemed to shake Emma's very bones. To the young lady in the blue jacket for $375. Emma stood on trembling legs, unsure whether to laugh or cry. She had just spent every dollar she had, plus $63 she did not possess, on a pregnant mare with an unknown history and a lame leg. Her grandmother would have called it foolishness of the highest order. But as she made her way to the cashier's window, fumbling through an explanation and a promise to return with the remaining balance within the week, she felt something she had not experienced in a very long time. She felt certain. The mare was loaded into Emma's battered horse trailer with surprising ease. Despite her size, she walked up the ramp calmly, as if she understood that something important had just happened. Emma secured the divider and checked the ties twice before climbing into her truck for the long drive home. Through the small window that connected the cab to the trailer, she could see the mare's eye watching her, unblinking and somehow grateful. The drive took 7 hours with the extra weight slowing them down on the hills. Emma talked the entire way, partly to keep herself awake and partly because the mare seemed to listen. She told her about the farm, about Grandma Ruth who had raised her after her parents passed, about the dream of building something meaningful on that small patch of Missouri earth. She told her about the loneliness of the past 2 years, working alone from dawn until dark, with no one to share the burden or the beauty. And somewhere around hour 4, as the sun began to set and paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, Emma decided on a name. "I'm going to call you Bella," she said through the window. "It means beautiful in Italian. My grandmother used to say that word whenever she saw something that took her breath away. And you, sweet girl, you are absolutely Bella." The mare nickered softly, and Emma could have sworn she saw her nod. They arrived at the farm well past midnight. Emma backed the trailer up to the barn door and led Bella down the ramp by the light of a single floodlight that buzzed and flickered like it might give out at any moment. The mare's hooves touched the Missouri soil, and she paused, lifting her head to smell the air. There were no other horses here, no crowds, no handlers with rough hands and rougher words. There was only the quiet of the countryside, the distant call of an owl, and the gentle voice of the woman who had saved her life. Emma led Bella into the largest stall, the one that had been empty since Grandma Ruth's old gelding passed 3 winters ago. Fresh straw covered the floor, and a bucket of clean water hung from the wall. It was not much, but it was safe, and it was warm, and it was home. "Sleep well, Bella," Emma whispered, stroking the mare's neck. "Tomorrow we start figuring things out together." The first weeks were harder than Emma had imagined. Bella was severely underweight despite her pregnancy, and the local veterinarian, Dr. Sarah Chen, shook her head when she completed her initial examination. "This horse has been through a lot," she said, her voice gentle but honest. "Malnutrition, hoof neglect, and that rear leg has an old tendon injury that was never treated properly. She'll always have some lameness." Emma nodded, having expected as much. "What about the pregnancy?" Dr. Chen pulled off her gloves and sighed. "That's the interesting part. Based on my examination, she's carrying more than 1 foal. I can't say for certain without an ultrasound, but I'd estimate twins, possibly even triplets." Emma's eyes widened. "Triplets? In a draft horse?" The veterinarian nodded. "It's extremely rare, and honestly, it complicates things significantly. Multiple births in horses are dangerous. The mortality rate is high for both the mare and the foals. Most breeders would terminate the pregnancy to save the mare." Emma looked at Bella, who stood quietly in the cross ties, her ears swiveled toward their conversation as if she understood every word. "And if we don't terminate?" Dr. Chen considered the question carefully. "Then we monitor her closely, keep her nutrition optimal, and hope for the best. It will be expensive. There will be complications. And there's a very real chance you could lose her, the foals, or all of them." The words hung in the air like storm clouds. Emma spent that night sitting in the straw beside Bella's stall, watching the mare sleep. The weight of the decision pressed down on her shoulders like a physical burden. She had $375 in debt, a farm that barely sustained itself, and now she faced veterinary bills that could easily climb into the thousands. The smart thing, the practical thing, would be to follow the doctor's advice and protect her investment. But when Emma looked at Bella's swollen belly, she did not see an investment. She saw life, fragile and precious and fighting against all odds to exist. She saw herself, in a way, struggling to build something from nothing, while the world told her it could not be done. By morning, her decision was made. "We're going to do this together," she told Bella, as the first light of dawn crept through the barn windows. "All of us. Whatever it takes." The weeks that followed tested Emma in ways she had never anticipated. Caring for a pregnant draft horse required resources she simply did not have, and the bills began to pile up like autumn leaves in a windstorm. Dr. Chen visited twice a week to monitor Bella's condition, each appointment costing money that Emma scraped together through a combination of odd jobs, selling eggs from her small flock of chickens, and quietly skipping meals when necessary. She told herself it was temporary, that things would improve once the foals arrived and she could figure out the next steps. But deep in her heart, She knew she was walking a tightrope over an abyss, and one wrong step could send everything tumbling into darkness. The townsfolk of Millbrook, the small community nearest to Emma's farm, had mixed opinions about her rescue of the pregnant mare. Some admired her compassion and stopped by with donations of hay or grain, their weathered hands pressing supplies into hers with gruff words of encouragement. Others shook their heads and whispered behind her back, calling her naive and irresponsible for taking on such a burden. Old Harold Jennings, who ran the feed store on Main Street, was among the skeptics. He had been in the horse business for 40 years and had seen countless young dreamers crash against the rocks of reality. When Emma came in to purchase vitamins for Bella, he leaned across the counter and fixed her with a stern gaze. "You know that mare's gonna break your heart," he said, not unkindly. "Horses like that, they come with baggage, and those foals, if they even survive, they'll be grade stock. No papers, no pedigree, no value to speak of. You'll spend thousands keeping them alive and you won't get a penny back." Emma met his eyes without flinching. "Some things are worth more than pennies, Mr. Jennings." He studied her for a long moment, then sighed and reached under the counter. He pulled out a bag of premium mare supplements and pushed it toward her. "On the house," he muttered. "Just this once. Don't go telling everyone I've gone soft." Emma smiled and thanked him, adding the supplements to her purchases. She had learned that kindness often hid behind gruff exteriors, and that the people who seemed hardest were sometimes the ones with the biggest hearts. As autumn deepened into winter, Bella's condition improved dramatically. The proper nutrition and consistent care began to show in her coat, which transformed from dull and patchy to a rich, gleaming chestnut that caught the winter sunlight like polished copper. Her mane and tail grew thick and luxurious, flowing like waterfalls of pale gold whenever she moved. The limp in her rear leg persisted, but it seemed to bother her less as the weeks passed, and she moved with increasing confidence around the small pasture Emma had fenced off for her exercise. The bond between horse and human deepened with each passing day. Emma spent hours in the barn, brushing Bella's coat, cleaning her hooves, and simply sitting in companionable silence while the mare rested. She learned to read Bella's moods through the position of her ears, the rhythm of her breathing, and the subtle shifts in her body language. When Bella was anxious, Emma would sing softly, old folk songs her grandmother had taught her, and the mare would gradually relax, her eyes half closing in contentment. Dr. Chen's ultrasound confirmed what she had suspected. Bella was carrying triplets, 3 tiny hearts beating in synchronized rhythm within her massive body. The news spread through Millbrook like wildfire, drawing curious visitors to Emma's farm who wanted to see the miracle mare for themselves. Some came with genuine interest and well wishes. Others came to gawk, treating Bella like a sideshow attraction rather than a living creature deserving of dignity. Emma quickly learned to distinguish between the two types and began limiting access to only those who approached with respect. Among the respectful visitors was a man named Thomas Wheeler, a retired equine geneticist who had spent 30 years studying draft horse bloodlines at a prestigious university. He arrived one December morning in a battered pickup truck, his silver hair windswept and his eyes bright with curiosity. Emma was initially wary, having grown tired of people who wanted to poke and prod at Bella without regard for her comfort. But Thomas was different. He approached the mare slowly, speaking in low tones and waiting for her to come to him rather than forcing contact. "Remarkable," he murmured, after spending nearly an hour simply observing Bella in her stall. "Absolutely remarkable." Emma stood nearby, arms crossed, waiting for whatever criticism or condescension would follow. Instead, Thomas turned to her with an expression of wonder. "Do you have any idea what you have here, young lady?" Emma shrugged. "A pregnant mare that nobody wanted. A liability, according to most people." Thomas shook his head slowly. "I've spent my entire career studying draft horses. I've seen thousands of Belgians, examined bloodlines going back generations, and I'm telling you, this mare is exceptional. Look at her bone structure, her conformation, the set of her shoulders. She's not just any Belgian. She's descended from championship stock, probably multiple generations of carefully bred animals." Emma stared at him, uncertain whether to believe what she was hearing. But she was abandoned, she said, left to starve on some foreclosed property. Nobody even knew her name. Thomas nodded sadly. That happens more often than you'd think. Economic hardship, family emergencies, people who get in over their heads. Sometimes the most valuable animals end up in the worst situations. But quality doesn't disappear just because circumstances change. He pulled a worn notebook from his jacket pocket and began sketching, capturing the lines of Bella's body with quick, confident strokes. If those foals inherit even half of her genetics, he continued without looking up, you could be looking at something truly special. Draft horse triplets are almost unheard of. If they survive, if they're healthy, they could be worth a considerable sum to the right buyers. But more than that, they could represent an important contribution to the breed. Emma felt something shift inside her chest, a small flame of hope that she had been afraid to acknowledge. She looked at Bella, who had moved closer to the stall door and was watching the conversation with those intelligent, knowing eyes. The mare nickered softly, and Emma reached out to stroke her velvet nose. "We're not thinking about selling anyone just yet," she said quietly. "First, we have to get through the birth." Thomas closed his notebook and nodded solemnly. Of course, one miracle at a time. Winter arrived with a vengeance that year, blanketing the Missouri countryside in layers of ice and snow that made even the simplest tasks feel like expeditions into hostile territory. Emma woke before dawn each morning to break the ice in Bella's water bucket, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air as she worked. The old barn, though sturdy, had gaps in the siding that let the cold wind whistle through, and she spent what little spare money she had on extra blankets and heat lamps to keep the expectant mother warm. Bella's belly grew larger with each passing week, stretching her skin tight and making movement increasingly difficult. The mare spent most of her time lying in the deep straw bedding Emma provided, conserving her energy for the monumental task that lay ahead. Dr. Chen's visits increased to 3 times weekly as the due date approached. Each examination brought a mixture of relief and anxiety. The foals were developing well, their heartbeats strong and steady, but the strain on Bella's body was evident. She had lost some of the weight she had gained earlier, her resources diverted to nourishing the 3 lives growing inside her. The financial pressure mounted relentlessly. Emma had taken a part-time job at the local diner, working the early morning shift before returning home to care for Bella. She slept in fragments, catching a few hours whenever she could between barn checks and work obligations. Dark circles formed beneath her eyes, and her clothes hung looser on her frame, but she refused to complain. Every sacrifice felt small compared to what Bella was enduring. Thomas Wheeler had become a regular presence at the farm, stopping by every few days to check on Bella's progress and offer what assistance he could. He brought bags of specialized feed that he claimed were extras from a friend's farm, though Emma suspected he was purchasing them himself. He also brought something equally valuable: knowledge. During his visits, he would share stories from his years of research, explaining the intricacies of draft horse genetics and the qualities that distinguished exceptional animals from ordinary ones. Emma absorbed every word, grateful for both the education and the company. One evening, as a particularly brutal storm raged outside, Thomas sat with Emma in the barn's small tack room, warming his hands around a cup of coffee. She had asked him about the auction, about how a horse like Bella could have ended up unwanted and alone. He was quiet for a long moment before answering. "The draft horse market is unpredictable," he explained. "Prices fluctuate based on demand, and that demand is tied to factors most people never think about. When the economy struggles, farmers sell their horses. When fuel prices drop, fewer people want animals for agricultural work. And when breeders fall on hard times, they sometimes have to let go of animals they've spent years developing." He took a sip of his coffee, his eyes distant with memory. "I've seen championship bloodlines scattered to the winds because of a single bad year. Horses worth tens of thousands of dollars sold for meat prices because nobody was buying. It's heartbreaking, but it's the reality of this industry." Emma stared into her own cup, watching the steam rise and dissipate. "Do you really think Bella came from championship stock?" Thomas nodded without hesitation. "I'd stake my reputation on it." Her conformation is textbook perfect, the kind you only see after generations of careful breeding. Someone invested a tremendous amount of time and resources into her lineage. The tragedy is that whoever abandoned her either didn't know what they had, or they were so desperate that it didn't matter. The conversation was interrupted by a sound from Bella's stall, a low groan that made both of them freeze. Emma was on her feet instantly, crossing the barn in quick strides. The mare was lying on her side, her breathing labored, her eyes rolling with discomfort. "It's too early," Emma said, panic edging into her voice. "She's not due for another 3 weeks." Thomas was already pulling out his phone. "I'm calling Dr. Chen. You stay with her. Keep her calm." The next 2 hours were among the most terrifying of Emma's life. She knelt in the straw beside Bella, stroking her neck and murmuring reassurances, while the mare's body struggled against something neither of them could see. Dr. Chen arrived through the storm, her headlights cutting through the swirling snow like beacons of hope. She examined Bella quickly, her expression growing more serious with each passing moment. "She's not in labor," she finally announced, and Emma felt her knees nearly buckle with relief. "But she's showing signs of significant stress. Her body is struggling to support the pregnancy. We need to get her stabilized." The veterinarian administered medications and adjusted Bella's diet, adding supplements that would help support her overtaxed system. She stayed until nearly midnight, monitoring the mare's vital signs until they returned to acceptable levels. Before she left, she pulled Emma aside, her voice low and serious. "I need you to understand the risks here," she said. "Bella's body is under tremendous strain. Multiple pregnancies in horses almost never go to term successfully. We might be looking at premature birth, which could mean losing one or more of the foals. Or we could lose Bella herself if her body simply cannot handle the demands." Emma felt tears burning in her eyes but refused to let them fall. "What can I do?" "Everything you're already doing and then some. Rest is critical for her now. Minimize stress, maintain her nutrition, and watch her constantly." After Dr. Chen departed, Emma returned to Bella's stall and lowered herself into the straw beside the exhausted mare. The storm continued to rage outside, wind howling through the gaps in the barn walls, but inside there was only the sound of Bella's steady breathing and the distant rumble of thunder. Emma laid her hand on the mare's swollen belly and felt movement beneath her palm, tiny lives stirring in the darkness of the womb. "I know you're scared," she whispered to Bella, who turned her great head to look at her with those deep, knowing eyes. "I'm scared too, but we've come too far to give up now. You're going to be a mother, and those babies are going to be amazing. I believe that with everything I have." Bella nickered softly and rested her muzzle against Emma's shoulder. In that moment, surrounded by the fury of winter and the weight of uncertainty, they drew strength from each other. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The weeks following the scare crept by with agonizing slowness. Emma transformed herself into a vigilant guardian, sleeping in the barn more nights than not, her body curled in a sleeping bag just outside Bella's stall. She learned to distinguish between the mare's normal sounds and those that signaled distress, waking instantly at any change in breathing or movement. The exhaustion carved itself into her features, but she refused to relent. Thomas brought her meals when she forgot to eat, and Dr. Chen adjusted her visit schedule to accommodate the heightened concern. The entire community of Millbrook, even the skeptics, began to rally around the young woman and her pregnant mare. Word of Bella's condition had spread beyond the small town, reaching equine enthusiasts and draft horse lovers across the region. Letters began arriving at Emma's farm, some containing words of encouragement, and others containing small donations to help with veterinary expenses. A local reporter contacted Emma about writing a story, but she declined, unwilling to turn Bella's struggle into a spectacle. February arrived with slightly warmer temperatures and the first tentative signs of approaching spring. The snow began to melt, revealing patches of brown earth that seemed to promise renewal and hope. Bella's due date drew nearer, and her body showed the unmistakable signs of impending birth. Her udder swelled with milk, and she grew increasingly restless, unable to find a comfortable position no matter how she arranged her massive frame. Dr. Chen began visiting daily, her equipment ready in the back of her truck for whatever emergency might arise. The tension in the barn was palpable, a held breath waiting to be released. Emma found herself talking to Bella constantly, sharing memories and dreams and fears as if the mare were a confidant rather than an animal. She told her about her parents, who had died in a car accident when she was just 7 years old. She told her about Grandma Ruth, who had swooped in to rescue her from the foster system and had given her a home filled with love and purpose. She told her about the loneliness that had settled into her bones after Ruth's passing, the feeling that she was adrift in a world that had forgotten she existed. And she told her about the day at the auction, when their eyes had met across the crowded pen and something had clicked into place like a key turning in a lock. "I didn't save you," she admitted one night, her voice barely above a whisper. "You saved me. I was drowning, Bella. I was going through the motions of living without actually being alive. And then there you were, this magnificent creature that everyone else had given up on, and suddenly I had a reason to fight again." Bella listened as she always did, her ears swiveled toward Emma's voice, her breathing slow and steady. Sometimes Emma could swear she saw understanding in those dark eyes, a recognition that transcended the boundaries between species. It was a connection she had never experienced with another living being, and she treasured it more than she could express. The night of February 23rd began like any other. Emma completed her evening chores, checked Bella's vital signs, and settled into her usual spot outside the stall. The mare seemed calm, perhaps calmer than she had been in weeks, and Emma allowed herself to hope that they might have a few more days before the main event. She drifted into an uneasy sleep around midnight, her dreams populated by visions of tiny foals running through green pastures under a summer sun. She woke to the sound of Bella groaning. The mare was on her feet, pacing in tight circles within the confines of her stall. Her sides heaved with labored breathing, and sweat darkened her chestnut coat. Emma was on her feet in an instant, her heart hammering against her ribs. This was it. After months of waiting, hoping, and praying, the moment had finally arrived. She called Dr. Chen with trembling fingers, then Thomas, then simply stood at the stall door, watching Bella move through the ancient rhythms of labor. Dr. Chen arrived within 20 minutes, Thomas close behind. The veterinarian examined Bella quickly and confirmed what they all knew. "She's in active labor," she announced, pulling on sterile gloves. "First foal is presenting normally. We just need to let nature take its course and be ready to assist if needed." The next several hours were a blur of tension, exhaustion, and ultimately, wonder. Bella labored with a determination that left them all in awe, her body working through each contraction with primal focus. Emma stayed at her head, stroking her neck and murmuring encouragements, while Dr. Chen monitored the progress from behind. Thomas stood ready with supplies, his face pale but his hands steady. The first foal arrived just as the sky began to lighten with the promise of dawn. It was a filly, her coat dark and slick with birth fluids, her legs impossibly long and spindly. She lay in the straw, blinking at the world with confused eyes, while Bella turned to examine her firstborn. The mare's exhaustion was evident, but so was something else, something that looked remarkably like maternal pride. There was no time to celebrate. Bella's contractions resumed almost immediately, signaling the arrival of the second foal. This birth was harder, the positioning slightly off, and Dr. Chen had to intervene to guide the foal safely into the world. It was another filly, slightly smaller than her sister, with a coat that already showed hints of the rich chestnut coloring she would eventually display. She emerged with a startled snort and immediately began attempting to stand, her legs wobbling beneath her like a newborn deer. "Two down, doctor," Chen said, wiping sweat from her brow. "One more to go." Emma looked at Bella, whose eyes had grown heavy with exhaustion. The mare's breathing was ragged, her body trembling from the monumental effort it had already expended. "Can she do this?" Emma asked, her voice cracking with fear. Dr. Chen met her eyes with an honesty that was both terrifying and reassuring. "She has to, and we have to help her." The final birth was the most difficult of all. Bella's body, already depleted from delivering two foals, struggled to muster the strength needed for the third. Her contractions grew weaker, more sporadic, and Dr. Chen's expression shifted from focused concentration to genuine concern. The foal wasn't progressing as it should, and every minute that passed increased the danger for both mother and baby. Emma knelt at Bella's head, her hands buried in the mare's sweat-soaked mane, her voice a constant stream of encouragement and love. "Come on, girl," she pleaded. "You're so close. Just a little more. You can do this. I know you can." Thomas had positioned himself to assist Dr. Chen, following her terse instructions with the precision of someone who had spent a lifetime around horses. Together they worked to reposition the foal, their movements careful but urgent. The barn was silent except for Bella's labored breathing and the soft whimpers of the two newborn fillies, who had been moved to a warm corner and were watching the proceedings with wide, curious eyes. Nearly an hour passed before they saw progress. The foal finally shifted into the correct position, and Bella seemed to find some reserve of strength hidden deep within her exhausted body. She pushed with renewed determination, her muscles straining, her legs scrambling against the straw for purchase. Emma held her breath, watching as Dr. Chen guided the foal through the final stages of delivery. And then, with one last tremendous effort, the third foal slipped into the world. It was a colt, larger than his sisters, his coat a striking pale gold that seemed to glow even in the dim light of the barn. He lay motionless for a heart-stopping moment, and Emma felt the world freeze around her. Then he snorted, shook his head, and began the ungainly process of figuring out how to breathe. Dr. Chen cleared his airways and stepped back, her face breaking into a smile for the first time all night. "He's perfect," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "They're all perfect." Emma looked at Bella, who had lifted her head to gaze at her three children. The mare's eyes, so tired and pain-filled moments before, now shone with something that could only be described as joy. She nickered softly, calling to her foals, and one by one they responded, their tiny voices joining hers in a chorus that made Emma's tears finally spill over. She buried her face in Bella's neck and wept, releasing all the fear and stress and hope that had built up over the past months. They did it. Against all odds, against every prediction and warning, they had actually done it. The hours that followed were filled with the quiet magic of new life. Each foal nursed successfully, their instincts guiding them to their mother's milk despite their wobbling legs and uncertain coordination. Bella, though exhausted beyond measure, attended to each of them with gentle patience, cleaning their coats and nudging them when they strayed too far. Thomas documented everything with his camera, capturing images that would later circulate through the draft horse community and beyond. Dr. Chen conducted thorough examinations of all four horses, her findings exceeding even her most optimistic expectations. The foals were healthy, strong, and showed no signs of the complications that typically plagued multiple births. Bella, despite her ordeal, was recovering remarkably well, her vital signs stabilizing as she bonded with her offspring. "It's nothing short of miraculous," the veterinarian admitted, shaking her head in disbelief. "I've been practicing for 20 years and I've never seen anything like this. Draft horse triplets that all survived birth, all healthy, all nursing. It shouldn't be possible, but here they are." Emma named the foals that afternoon, choosing names that reflected both their miraculous arrival and her hopes for their futures. The first filly, dark and bold, she called Hope. The second, smaller and perhaps the most spirited of the three, she named Grace. And the colt, with his stunning golden coat and already apparent strength, she named Fortune. It seemed fitting somehow, though she didn't yet understand just how prophetic the name would prove to be. Word of the successful birth spread rapidly through Millbrook and beyond. The local newspaper finally convinced Emma to allow a brief interview, and the story ran on the front page with photographs of Bella and her three newborns. The headline read, "Miracle Mare Defies All Odds," and within days, the article had been picked up by regional and then national outlets. Emma's phone, which rarely rang, suddenly wouldn't stop. Journalists wanted interviews. Television stations requested filming access. Draft horse enthusiasts from across the country reached out, expressing amazement and congratulations. But it was the calls from breeders and buyers that truly stunned her. Thomas had been right about Bella's genetics. As the story spread, people who knew draft horses began examining the photographs with expert eyes. They noticed the same things Thomas had identified months earlier: the exceptional conformation, The perfect proportions, the unmistakable markers of championship bloodlines. Theories about Bella's origins began to circulate, with some suggesting she might be descended from some of the most valuable Belgian lines in American history. The offers started coming in before the foals were even a week old. $5,000 for Hope, $8,000 for Grace, $12,000 for Fortune, whose golden coloring and robust build had captured particular attention. Emma rejected them all without hesitation, not because of the amounts, but because she wasn't ready to think about parting with any member of her unexpected family. The foals grew stronger with each passing day, their personalities emerging as they explored the world around them. Hope was the adventurer, always first to investigate new sights and sounds. Grace was the gentle one, preferring to stay close to her mother and watch her siblings from a safe distance. And Fortune, true to his name, seemed destined for greatness from the moment he took his first steps. He was larger than his sisters, more confident, and possessed a presence that made people stop and stare whenever they saw him. Thomas visited daily, watching the foals develop with the practiced eye of someone who had dedicated his life to understanding these magnificent animals. One evening, as they stood at the pasture fence watching Bella graze while her foals played nearby, he turned to Emma with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Do you understand what you have here?" he asked quietly. Emma shrugged, uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "I have a family," she replied simply. "A family I never expected and wouldn't trade for anything." Thomas smiled, but there was something serious beneath it. "Yes, you do, but you also have something else, something that could change everything for you, for this farm, for the entire draft horse community." She looked at him, waiting for him to continue. Thomas reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a folded document, its edges worn from handling. He had been carrying it for weeks, waiting for the right moment to share its contents. "This came from a colleague of mine," he explained, unfolding the paper carefully. "He specializes in draft horse genealogy, tracing bloodlines back through generations of breeding records. I sent him photographs of Bella and the foals, along with some physical measurements and observations. What he found is extraordinary." Emma took the document and scanned its contents, though the technical language and complicated family trees meant little to her untrained eye. Thomas saw her confusion and gently took the paper back, pointing to a specific section near the bottom. "Your Bella," he said, his voice carrying a weight of reverence, "is almost certainly a direct descendant of a mare named Dorian's Golden Lady." Emma shook her head, the name meaning nothing to her. "Who is that?" Thomas smiled at the question. Golden Lady was one of the most celebrated Belgian mares in American history. She won every major competition she entered during the 1980s and produced offspring that went on to dominate the show circuit for decades. Her bloodline was considered one of the most valuable in the breed, with foals selling for prices that made headlines in agricultural publications. Emma stared at him, struggling to process what she was hearing. The mare she had purchased for $375 at a kill auction, the horse that nobody wanted, was descended from royalty. It seemed impossible, like something from a fairy tale rather than real life. But Thomas wasn't finished. "There's more," he continued. "Based on Bella's conformation and the characteristics of the foals, my colleague believes their sire was also of exceptional lineage. We can't prove it without genetic testing, but the physical evidence is compelling. If he's right, these three foals represent a combination of bloodlines that hasn't existed in decades." Emma looked toward the pasture, where Fortune was attempting to convince his sisters to chase him around the perimeter. They looked like any other foals, playful and clumsy and full of energy. Yet according to Thomas, they were something far more significant. "What does this mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "It means," Thomas replied, "that you're standing in front of a fortune." The months that followed brought changes that Emma could never have anticipated. As the foals matured, their exceptional qualities became increasingly apparent even to casual observers. Fortune, in particular, developed into a specimen that drew gasps from everyone who saw him. By 6 months old, he stood taller than most yearlings, his golden coat gleaming like burnished metal, his muscles rippling beneath skin that seemed barely able to contain his power. His movement was fluid and graceful despite his size, each step carrying the confidence of an animal that knew its own magnificence. Hope and Grace developed beautifully as well, their chestnut coats deepening to match their mother's rich coloring, their frames filling out with the solid muscle characteristic of the finest Belgian draft horses. They had inherited Bella's temperament along with her genetics, displaying the calm, willing nature that made the breed so beloved. Dr. Chen, who had continued monitoring their development, declared them among the healthiest foals she had ever examined. The offers continued to arrive, each one larger than the last. 15,000 for Fortune, 20,000, 30. A breeding farm in Kentucky offered $50,000 for the colt alone, promising to make him the cornerstone of their program. Emma rejected them all, though each refusal grew harder than the one before. The money could solve so many problems. It could repair the barn roof, which leaked during every storm. It could replace the ancient tractor that had finally given up. It could provide security she had never known. But every time she looked at Fortune, at Hope, at Grace, she saw more than dollar signs. She saw family. She saw the continuation of something precious that had nearly been lost. And she couldn't bring herself to break that apart for any amount of money. Thomas understood her reluctance, but also recognized the practical realities she faced. "You don't have to sell them," he said one afternoon as they watched the foals play. "But you should consider your options carefully. These animals could provide for you and this farm for the rest of your life if you manage their potential wisely." He explained the possibilities, laying them out like a map to a future she had never imagined. Fortune, once mature, could stand at stud, his exceptional genetics commanding fees that would provide steady income for years. Hope and Grace could become foundation mares for a breeding program, their offspring carrying forward the valuable bloodlines they had inherited. The farm itself could become a destination for draft horse enthusiasts, a place where people came to see the miraculous triplets and perhaps purchase their descendants. Emma listened carefully, her mind racing with possibilities she had never considered. She had always assumed her life would be a struggle, a constant battle against poverty and circumstance. The idea that it could be something else, something prosperous and purposeful, was almost too much to comprehend. But Thomas believed it, and Dr. Chen believed it, and slowly, hesitantly, Emma began to believe it too. The first anniversary of the triplets' birth arrived on a cold February morning, exactly 1 year after that terrifying night when Bella had labored against all odds to bring 3 lives into the world. Emma marked the occasion with a small celebration, just herself and Thomas and Dr. Chen, gathered in the barn with cake and sparkling cider. Bella received extra treats and affection, while the foals, now technically yearlings, received new halters and colors that matched their personalities. Hope's was bold red, Grace's was soft lavender, and Fortune's was a deep gold that complemented his stunning coat. As Emma stood in the barn that night, surrounded by the family she had built from nothing, she reflected on how much had changed. A year ago, she had been drowning in loneliness and despair. Now she had purpose, connection, and hope for a future she was only beginning to imagine. The road ahead remained uncertain, full of challenges she couldn't predict, and decisions she wasn't ready to make. But she was no longer walking it alone. Bella nickered softly from her stall, and Emma crossed to stroke her velvet nose. "Thank you," she whispered to the mare who had started it all. "Thank you for choosing me." Bella's eyes, deep and knowing as ever, seemed to say that the gratitude went both ways. The second year brought growth, recognition, and challenges that tested Emma's resolve in ways she hadn't anticipated. Fortune continued his remarkable development, standing at 17 hands by his second birthday with the promise of growing even taller. His golden coat had deepened to a rich amber shade that seemed to capture and hold the sunlight, and his flaxen mane and tail flowed like rivers of silk whenever he moved. Experts who visited the farm declared him one of the finest young Belgian stallions they had ever seen, a living embodiment of everything the breed aspired to be. Hope and Grace matured into beautiful mares, their frames filling out with the powerful musculature that defined their heritage. Hope retained her adventurous spirit, always the first to investigate anything new that entered her world, while Grace remained the gentle soul of the trio, content to stand quietly and observe while her siblings explored. Together with their mother, they formed a herd that drew visitors from across the country, people who had heard the story and wanted to see the miracle horses for themselves. Emma had reluctantly allowed the farm to become a modest destination, charging small fees for tours that had helped cover the ever-increasing costs of maintaining 4 exceptional draft horses. She had hired help for the first time, a young woman named Sarah who shared her passion for horses and proved invaluable in managing the daily responsibilities. The barn roof had been repaired, the fences reinforced, and a proper arena constructed where Emma could work with the horses and demonstrate their abilities to visitors. But with recognition came unwanted attention. Not everyone who showed interest in the horses had good intentions, and Emma learned this lesson in the hardest possible way during the summer of the triplets' second year. It began with small things. Gates left open that she was certain she had closed, feed bins moved from their usual positions, unfamiliar tire tracks in the driveway. She dismissed these incidents as forgetfulness or coincidence, too focused on her daily responsibilities to recognize the pattern forming around her. The night of the attempted theft started like any other. Emma completed her evening rounds, checked on each horse, and retired to the small apartment she had built in the barn's converted hayloft. She had moved there permanently, finding comfort in the proximity to her animals and the sounds of their breathing as she fell asleep. Around 2 a.m, Bella's urgent neighing woke her from a deep sleep. The mare's alarm was unmistakable, a sound Emma had never heard her make before, filled with fear and warning. Emma was out of bed and down the ladder before she fully understood what was happening. In the darkness of the barn aisle, she could make out figures moving near Fortune's stall. A flashlight beam swept across the walls, and she heard voices, low and urgent, discussing something she couldn't quite make out. Her heart hammering, Emma grabbed the phone from her pocket and dialed 911, then reached for the shotgun she kept mounted near the door. Her grandmother had taught her to shoot when she was 12 years old, and she had never been more grateful for those lessons. The confrontation that followed would replay in her nightmares for months. Emma switched on the barn lights, flooding the space with harsh fluorescent brightness, and found herself facing 3 men she had never seen before. They had ropes, a trailer backed up to the barn door, and expressions that shifted from surprise to anger when they realized they had been discovered. One of them moved toward her, and Emma raised the shotgun, her voice steady, despite the terror coursing through her veins. "The police are on their way," she announced, praying it was true and that they would arrive in time. "You need to leave now." The standoff lasted an eternity compressed into minutes. The men exchanged glances, calculating their odds, weighing their options. Emma kept the shotgun trained on them, her finger resting alongside the trigger guard exactly as her grandmother had taught her. Behind her, she could hear Bella still calling out, and the triplets responding with their own frightened whinnies. Finally, the men made their choice. They retreated to their trailer, engines roaring to life as they disappeared down the driveway moments before the flashing lights of sheriff's vehicles appeared at the farm's entrance. The aftermath of the attempted theft brought significant changes to Emma's operation. Security cameras were installed throughout the property, along with motion-activated lights, and an alarm system that would alert both her and local authorities to any intrusion. The county sheriff, a weathered man named Douglas who had known Emma's grandmother, took a personal interest in the case and promised increased patrols in the area. Thomas, horrified by what had happened, contributed funds from his own savings to help cover the security improvements. The incident also forced Emma to confront realities she had been avoiding. Her horses were valuable, far more valuable than she had truly internalized, and that value made them targets. She couldn't protect them alone, couldn't manage the farm alone, couldn't carry the weight of responsibility alone any longer. For someone who had spent years building walls around herself, asking for help felt like admitting defeat. But the alternative was unthinkable. The community of Millbrook responded to her need with a generosity that overwhelmed her. Neighbors volunteered to take shifts watching the property. Local businesses donated materials for additional fencing. The feed store where old Harold Jennings had once warned her about heartbreak now displayed a collection jar on the counter, gathering contributions from customers who had followed the triplets' story from the beginning. Even people Emma had never met stopped by to offer support, drawn by the tale of the pregnant mare that nobody wanted and the young woman who had given her a chance. Through it all, Bella remained Emma's anchor. The mare seemed to understand the gravity of what had happened, and she stayed close to her foals in the days following the incident, her protective instincts on high alert. Emma spent hours in the pasture with them, drawing comfort from their presence and finding peace in the simple rhythms of their daily existence. She had almost lost them, almost seen everything she had built destroyed in a single night. The knowledge made every moment with them feel more precious, more significant. The men who had attempted the theft were never caught, disappearing into the anonymous vastness of the American landscape. But their failed effort had an unexpected consequence. It drew even more attention to the triplets' story. News coverage of the incident reached audiences who had never heard of Bella or her remarkable offspring, and the resulting wave of interest brought opportunities Emma had never imagined. The invitation arrived on a crisp October morning, tucked inside an envelope bearing the embossed seal of the National Belgian Horse Association. Emma stared at it for several minutes before she fully comprehended its contents. The association was hosting its centennial celebration at their headquarters in Wabash, Indiana, the birthplace of American-Belgian breeding, and they wanted Fortune, Hope, and Grace to be the featured attraction. The triplets had become legendary within the draft horse community, their story representing everything the breed stood for: resilience, strength, and the capacity to overcome adversity. Having them present at the centennial would honor both their remarkable journey and the broader history of Belgians in America. Emma's initial instinct was to decline. The thought of transporting her horses across multiple states, exposing them to crowds and chaos and the countless risks of travel, filled her with anxiety. But Thomas, who had received his own invitation to speak at the event, gently encouraged her to reconsider. "This is an opportunity to share their story with people who will truly appreciate it," he argued. "And it's a chance for you to see the world your horses have inherited, the legacy they're now part of." After weeks of deliberation and careful planning, Emma agreed. The journey to Indiana required a specially designed trailer capable of safely transporting 4 adult draft horses, a vehicle Emma could never have afforded on her own. The association arranged for a professional equine transport company to handle the logistics, sending a driver experienced with valuable animals and a trailer equipped with every comfort and safety feature available. Bella, now 12 years old and showing the first hints of gray around her muzzle, would travel with her offspring, her presence essential to keeping the triplets calm during the unfamiliar experience. The drive took 2 days, with overnight stops at facilities prepared for their arrival. Emma rode in the transport vehicle's cab, unable to sleep, checking on her horses at every opportunity. She watched through the small window as Bella stood steady and calm, her example helping her now 3-year-old offspring manage their own anxiety. Fortune, in particular, seemed to draw strength from his mother, pressing his golden body against the partition that separated them, as if absorbing her tranquility through the metal barrier. They arrived in Wabash to a reception that stunned Emma into speechlessness. Hundreds of people had gathered to witness the triplets' arrival, their cameras flashing, their voices rising in appreciation as first Bella, then Hope, then Grace, and finally Fortune descended the trailer ramp. The crowd parted like water before them, creating a path lined with admirers who reached out to touch the horses' gleaming coats as they passed. Emma walked at Fortune's side, her hand resting on his neck, feeling his muscles tense and relax as he processed the overwhelming attention. He handled it with a dignity that made her heart swell with pride, his head held high, his steps measured and confident, every inch the champion his breeding had destined him to become. The centennial celebration lasted 3 days, and the triplets were the undisputed stars of every event. They participated in exhibitions demonstrating the power and versatility of draft horses, their movements synchronized in a display that drew gasps from even the most experienced handlers. Fortune, in particular, captivated audiences with his combination of strength and grace, pulling weighted sleds that would challenge horses twice of his age while moving with the elegance of a dancer. Breeders and collectors approached Emma constantly, their offers growing more extravagant with each passing hour. $100,000 for Fortune, $75,000 each for Hope and Grace. A breeding syndicate proposed purchasing all three triplets for a combined sum that made Emma's head spin when she heard it. She declined each offer politely but firmly, her resolve strengthened by the experience of seeing her horses in this context, surrounded by people who recognized their true worth. On the final evening of the celebration, a special ceremony was held to honor the triplets and their remarkable story. Emma stood on a stage before hundreds of attendees, her horses arranged behind her like living monuments to the power of love and determination. Thomas delivered a speech about the genetics that made them exceptional, the championship bloodlines that had nearly been lost to neglect and circumstance. Dr. Chen spoke about the medical miracle of their birth, the odds they had overcome simply to exist. And then it was Emma's turn. She had never been comfortable with public speaking, had never sought attention or recognition for what she had done. But standing there, looking out at faces filled with respect and admiration, she found words she hadn't known she possessed. 3 years ago, she began, her voice trembling slightly before finding its strength. I drove 6 hours to an auction with $300 and a dream that most people told me was foolish. I wasn't looking for champion bloodlines or valuable genetics. I was looking for a horse that needed me as much as I needed her. She paused, glancing back at Bella, who stood watching her with those deep, knowing eyes that had captured her heart from the very first moment. What I found was so much more than I ever imagined. I found a family. I found a purpose. I found proof that miracles still happen when we open our hearts to possibilities that others have dismissed. The audience listened in rapt silence as Emma told the story of Bella's rescue, of the pregnancy that should have ended in tragedy, of the three foals who had defied every prediction to become the magnificent horses standing before them now. She spoke of the sleepless nights and the mounting bills, and the terror of almost losing them to thieves who saw only dollar signs where she saw souls. And she spoke of the community that had rallied around her, the strangers who had become friends, the skeptics who had become believers. None of this would exist without the people who helped along the way, she concluded, tears streaming down her face. And none of it would matter without understanding what these horses really represent. They're not valuable because of their bloodlines or their conformation or their potential in the show ring. They're valuable because they're alive, because someone saw worth in them when the rest of the world saw waste. The standing ovation that followed lasted nearly 5 minutes. Emma stood motionless, overwhelmed by the response, until Fortune stepped forward and rested his massive head against her shoulder, grounding her in the reality of the moment. The return to Missouri felt different than the departure. Emma drove through the familiar landscape with new eyes, seeing her small farm not as a struggling operation, but as the foundation of something extraordinary. The centennial celebration had changed more than her perspective. It had opened doors she never knew existed. The National Belgian Horse Association had offered her an official partnership, providing resources and support in exchange for allowing Fortune to participate in their breeding program while remaining under her ownership and care. The arrangement guaranteed income that would sustain the farm for years while keeping her family intact. Hope and Grace would remain with Emma permanently, their futures as foundation mares for a breeding program that would carry forward the remarkable genetics they had inherited. Thomas had agreed to serve as an advisor, lending his expertise to ensure that every breeding decision honored the legacy these horses represented. Dr. Chen had committed to overseeing the health of the herd, her professional investment in their well-being having long since transformed into personal devotion. The years that followed brought prosperity beyond anything Emma had imagined during those desperate early days. Fortune matured into a stallion of legendary proportions, his offspring commanding prices that made headlines in agricultural publications across the country. His first foal, a colt named Destiny, sold for $85,000 to a breeding farm in Pennsylvania. His second, a filly called Aurora, went to a family in Oregon who had waited 3 years for the opportunity to own one of his descendants. Each sale brought not only financial security, but also the satisfaction of knowing that Fortune's exceptional genetics were spreading across the nation, strengthening the Belgian breed for generations to come. Hope produced her first foal at age 5, a beautiful chestnut filly that inherited her grandmother Bella's calm temperament and strike for generations to come. Hope produced her first foal at age 5, a beautiful chestnut filly that inherited her grandmother Bella's calm temperament and striking conformation. Emma named her legacy, a tribute to the bloodline she carried and the story that had made her existence possible. Grace followed a year later with twin colts, another rarity that seemed almost ordinary given the family's history of defying expectations. The farm itself transformed gradually, each improvement funded by the success of the breeding program. The old barn was renovated and expanded, its weathered boards replaced with sturdy new lumber while maintaining the rustic character Emma loved. A state-of-the-art veterinary facility was constructed on the property, allowing Dr. Chen to provide comprehensive care without the stress of transporting horses to distant clinics. Pastures were expanded, fencing upgraded, and a beautiful farmhouse rose from the foundation of Emma's grandmother's original home, honoring the past while embracing their by a community of people who shared her passion and supported her vision. Sarah, her first employee, had become a partner in the operation, her expertise complementing Emma's instincts in ways that made them both stronger. Visitors came from around the world to see the famous triplets and hear their story, leaving inspired to find their own miracles in unexpected places. Bella, the mare who had started it all, aged gracefully into her twilight years. Her coat had lightened to a soft rose color, and her movements had slowed, but her spirit remained undiminished. She spent her days in the pasture nearest the farmhouse, where Emma could see her from every window, surrounded by descendants who owed their existence to her remarkable survival. The bond between woman and horse had only deepened with time, their connection transcending the ordinary relationship between human and animal. On the morning of Bella's 20th birthday, Emma organized a celebration that brought together everyone who had played a role in the journey. Thomas, now well into his 70s, but still sharp as ever, delivered a toast to the mare who had changed so many lives. Dr. Chen shared stories of medical challenges overcome and miracles witnessed. Neighbors who had once doubted Emma's decision to rescue an unwanted pregnant mare admitted their errors with laughter and tears. Fortune, Hope, and Grace stood in the ceremonial paddock, their coats gleaming in the summer sunshine, living testaments to the power of compassion and perseverance. Around them played their offspring, a new generation carrying forward the legacy their grandmother had nearly taken to her grave. The sight filled Emma with an emotion she could barely contain, a mixture of pride, gratitude, and wonder at how dramatically her life had changed since that fateful day at the auction. As the celebration wound down and guests departed, Emma found herself alone with Bella in the quiet of the evening. She sat on the grass beside the old mare, who had lowered herself carefully to rest in her favorite spot beneath the ancient oak tree. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold, and the world seemed to hold its breath in appreciation of the beauty. "Do you remember?" Emma asked softly, stroking Bella's silver mane, "when nobody wanted you, when they said you were worthless, that you'd never amount to anything?" Bella turned her great head to look at Emma, her eyes still holding that depth of wisdom and understanding that had drawn them together from the very beginning. "Of course you don't remember it the way I do," Emma continued with a smile. "You never believed what they said. You always knew your worth, even when no one else could see it." She leaned forward and pressed her forehead against Bella's neck, breathing in the familiar scent that had become synonymous with home. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for teaching me that the things worth having are the things worth fighting for." Bella nickered softly in response, her warm breath ruffling Emma's hair. In that moment, as the last light of day faded into the gentle darkness of a Missouri evening, Emma understood that her life had been transformed not by money or recognition or the spectacular success of her breeding program. It had been transformed by love, the simple, profound love between a woman and a horse that nobody wanted. The stars emerged one by one, scattered across the vast canvas of the night sky, and Emma remained beside Bella until the old mare drifted into peaceful sleep. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chapters in a story that continued to unfold in unexpected ways. But tonight, she was exactly where she belonged, surrounded by the family she had built from nothing but hope and determination, and that she realized was worth more than any fortune in the world.